orgs, talking about hiring, position, compensation, VPs. Then it was, what was after it? Then, yeah, reporting, EIBs. And then this last piece is the integration piece.
Yeah.
So we talked about like EIBs, making sure that it's, even this core connector worker is also kind of, there's no real programming involved and stuff, but EIBs are really for like the functional user to just kind of send to the vendor if they need to, need any information from the downstream system, or actually take any data out from Workday and send to them to keep it updated. But a great way, so that is something just kind of like ad hoc, or maybe you have it on the schedule for something very specific. Core connector worker, you'll see that you get to kind of do the same thing, and it's great for like kind of change detection. There's a little bit more functionality, and it's a little bit more complex in some of the information that it could send over and stuff. So we'll walk through that. There's several steps that are kind of involved with the core connector worker, and we'll kind of go through each one of them, but just kind of listing it out here. We're going to first create the integration system. And then after you create the integration system, you get to say what templates that you want to use. So there's several, and we just kind of take it high level. There's further classes to talk about more integration systems in depth, like if you're trying to create something different, or like if you want to create your own custom sort of integration, you can use Studio Integration. And that's where you have a lot more flexibility of what type of data you want to pull out, what you want to do with the data before sending it to anywhere, or like how you want to merge some of the data. But this core connector worker is a package integration, and a package integration, all that is Workday delivers it, it's kind of out of the box. You'll have like some settings that you can configure depending on your business use case, but they go ahead and maintain it. They make sure that it's always working. If they're changing anything in Workday, they make sure that the appropriate web services that these integrations use are updated as well. But it's a nice way that it's out of the box. Anything that's custom, they like they'll maintain the web services that you'll be using in the custom integration. But everything else, like if it breaks, you kind of have to figure out like what's going on, troubleshoot it, and make sure that it's not anything to do with the integration you built. But if it's actually the data maybe or the web service, then that's when you could reach out to Workday and ask for help. But most likely, if it's a studio integration that's built by the consultant, and then once it breaks or something changes, usually the customer might not have an integration person that knows Studio. So then they reach out to some sort of consulting services, be it Workday or be it a partner, to kind of figure it out. But with these core connector workers, it's really nice because again, they're out of the box, they get maintained by Workday. So anything that changes and if it breaks, they're kind of on the hook to fix it. So that's all these templates are. There's a whole bunch that are kind of delivered by Workday, be it in benefits, payroll, time tracking, all this stuff. But we're just going to focus on core connector worker just to kind of give you an idea. And most likely, your customers are going to end up using it or have it already built in, and you're just going to be ending up maintaining it if you're actually at any customer. Then, like I was talking about, that there's integration attributes. Like there's a lot of configurations when you start playing around with it. I know first I actually started off with the payroll integration, and every integration has these same things: attributes, services, field attributes, field overrides, and configuring maps. All of this, and I'll show you. There's only like one real thing that's required in terms of an attribute, but everything else, it's really optional, and it's up to the customer, depending on their business use cases or their requirements, what they actually need to do. So very high level, but we'll take it step by step. And so I took a couple of screenshots, and I'll walk through the screenshots really quickly. And then luckily the 10 is up, but I don't know if this person has all the access. So I took a whole bunch of screenshots just so I could get through the course. So the first thing we'll do is create integration system, and that's the task, right? And then you could give, it's called system name, but it's really the integration name. You can put the comments in, and then here's the template. All right, and let's call it 10, 1, and I should mention this core connector worker is an outbound. So it's pulling data out of Workday. There is no inbound for that. I'm going to click OK. And at this point, you've created the integration. At this time, there's like several things that we need to update. So just like I was showing here. So the first thing is that there's a whole bunch of these services. There's some that have to be enabled in order for the integration to work. So this is basically just saying ESB service is kind of like the server that it's going to be calling, the cloud server, the integration server. And this needs to be enabled, and it's kind of out of the box. Like, you don't have the option of turning it on. The ones that are optional are the ones that you can go ahead, based on your needs, enable or disable. It's up to you. So I will walk through a couple. So over here, I want to, this is a new thing that they came out with. Trying to remember what it is. They call it DIS, but it's data initialization service, and it's basically like it just does a whole dump of everything in XML format and attaches it to the integration event. Then you have, so what this is basically you have all this stuff that the integration needs in order to work, like when it's launched. But then this optional stuff is all the kind of information that it could send. I'll go through this a little bit later, and this one actually, and the CSV option, I guess. But basically, when you scroll down and where it starts saying worker, this is all the information that you could possibly pull about the worker in this file. So you could have their profile photo, you could have personal data section fields, and let's go ahead and select that one. You could get worker status data, you could get position data. Let's just select that one. And the way to get back to this is, that was as soon as we created, we got to look at the services right away, because that's usually the first thing that you're going to go ahead and turn on and off depending on what you want. But anything to do with configuration or like updating anything about the integration itself will all be on this um, menu item, this integration system of the related actions. So you get several things, and we'll walk through several of them, but this is where configure integration services, where we were doing this. And then of course, like, usually for testing out initially or when you're playing around with it, you can enable all services and just see what it does. But I am just going to leave it at that and click OK. And so we went through this. Okay, so the next piece that we'll go over is the attributes piece. And this is probably what the error message is saying. So as soon as you enable the web services, now when you're going to be launching this integration, it uses attributes, and we'll go through high level what these attributes are, but it's what the integration uses to see what has been configured. And there's one specifically that's required for launch. So a lot of times these out of the box kind of packaged integrations, there may be several of these that you have to configure what you want to do with it. So let's just look at what those are. So here are all the services, right, that we did. And then the second piece is these attributes underneath. And it's letting them know like what you configured for this. If you don't configure anything, it'll just come up with the default name for the output file. Same thing with document tags, you can. But over here, you see that this version is required for launch, and I'll go through that. And then output format, they have it defaulted to XML, but it recently was added that you can add CSV, the output file, and that's what that service was up above also. And you could say you want to include inactive workers in full file. So all of this is kind of just, kind of like the reporting stuff, prompting basically, and kind of doing that over here. And so name types. So there's several, but the only one, and so you could play around with these, but the only one that's really required for launch is this one here. So you're letting it know just the version number to use. And the best practice is just to use the latest version, right? So since these integrations use web services and there's specific version numbers, so let's say, well, let's see what's the latest one. So again, integration system, and I want to configure the integration attributes, and I'm going down to the required one. Okay, so here it is, and I click that. Let me see if I could zoom so I could see. All right. And you get to select the latest version. And with Workday in general, all their web services, if they make any change, then they update it in a specific web service version. You're probably well aware of that from um, working with integrations probably on your other systems. So they just have to make sure that if they make any changes, everything is versioned, and then it also has to be backwards compatible. So let's say I built this integration system when we were on web service version 23, and I want this to continue running and not breaking, right? Workday will let you know. I think they put it out like almost like a year and a half to 2 years if they're going to make any huge breaking change, or they're not going to be able to make it backwards compatible. But usually that's not generally an issue. Um, so that way your integration continues running and you don't have to worry about updating things constantly. But when you're making something fresh and new, the best practice is to use just kind of the latest version, so that way you don't have to worry about it for a while. Then this other piece over here is restricted to environment. And whenever you're configuring these attributes, you'll always be given the option of which environment you want to run it in. So normally they won't ever remove a field, right? Once it's used, that's why they have to make sure that something's backwards compatible. Recently, they did that with another field. Then they have to, like I may have mentioned it in a previous class or something, they always have to do conversions. So that data, like since people may have put data in that field, they'll never go ahead and just remove a field. They have to figure out where that data needs to live, right? So there will always be some kind of field, and they'll do the conversion behind the scenes. So let's say, I don't know, let's say they had a certain date of birth field on a specific web service, right? And they decided, you know what, it shouldn't really be called date of birth. It really should be called something else because everybody has inputted data into that field. They'll have to make sure that even if they're repurposing it or moving it or whatever, it still needs to work somewhere. So let's say all of a sudden, instead of DOB, that field is now called date of birth, actually written out or something like that. And they want to update it everywhere to be date of birth. Or I don't even know, like maybe that was a bad example. But you see what I'm saying? Like, so I see what you're saying from like the table side, but Workday, like in terms of they have to make sure that they don't make a breaking change like that. If it's a breaking change like that, they have to give ample time for customers to update to that version.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. So these the conversion testing, I'm not sure why this one is showing up, but generally Impl, Prod, Sandbox are the ones that you'll get to see. And then, for whatever reason, in this scenario, it doesn't make any sense. But, like let's say, I think, is there a delivery one on this one? Um, but maybe it's the Apple file name. You want it to be a certain way in Sandbox and a certain way, like in your testing environment, versus a certain way in Prod. You'll be able to kind of do that over here. So I think, and if you just leave it blank, then it just applies to all 10. So that's the attributes. And then, and another thing was, I think I kind of went over it is, if you scroll further down, it's what sort of data you want to include. Do you want to also include non-primary addresses? Do you want to include different phone types in the file or not? We did. So then I went ahead and I kind of picked these fields. So now let's go ahead and configure the integration field attribute. So this is where you get to say, based on that specific segment of data, what are the specific fields you want to choose within there? So let's take a look at it. Configure integration field attributes. Let me do this so I'm not popping back. So just like how I selected first in terms of the data that I wanted from the services. So over here, these were the ones that I selected. I selected personal data, or I could go ahead and select, give me the first name, last name. Maybe I don't care about um the middle name. And then let me go ahead and click on name. I want gender, date of birth, marital status, health status. I think that's good. That's all. And I could do that with, you know, all the other ones, position data, compensation data, and I just click OK. So now I've said what specific data I want on the output file by doing that. So first, you select the services. It tells you you get to do a couple of things about the integration, but then you also get to choose the specific data sections. And then you go further down and you choose the specific fields you want. And then you could even do maximum length. All that does is it's not going to allow you to choose like, and we'll get to that in a bit, that, if it's female, that you just want the first character. I guess in that scenario, if F, but if it's the, what is it, country, you just want to go ahead and cut it off for a maximum length. It's not that, United States of America, because you want it to be 3, that all of a sudden it's going to know that it should be USA. Now let's go and run this integration so we can look at the parameters. That's about what I called it. Delicious. Okay. Go back here. And then to run the integration, it's kind of similar to the reporting and the EIB one. You go to the menu, author related actions for integration, and then launch schedule. And then we'll go over scheduling too again. But right now, just run now. And there's certain parameters, right? And I know we're gonna have fun with this one, but let's just ignore this for right now. And over here, you get to say the bottom 3. If you want to run this, let's say I only want to run this for Joy Banks. I can go ahead and put Joy Banks in here or a couple of workers in here. If I wanted by a specific org, global, what is it, global modern services or any org, I could do it just by org level. And then over here right now, full file. Hopefully it doesn't go too crazy. But maybe I should change it because otherwise it's going to take a really long. I feel what you're saying is exactly what I'll show you in a little bit, and that Workday does do it. So it's called transaction log service. and we just need to enable it. So I'll walk through
Okay.
that piece. And so basically it's a change file. Right now we're doing a full file. So this
Right.
is like,
Right.
if you just want to see everything, who cares about
Yeah.
changes and that's usually just, the first time that you're working with the vendor, or maybe when the benefits first, like, okay, I can open this. Okay, so great. This diagnostic audit, it just is a user-friendly way. Like, again, if a person is an integration administrator and they're trying to, I don't know, maybe the HR person reaches out to them and is like, hey, I don't see this information, or like the downstream system just notified us that they couldn't receive it. What usually the integration admin will do is go ahead and just send this information. This is just a user-friendly way of seeing what was the data that was being looked at, and then you can hopefully click into it and it'll let you know why the specific person wasn't picked up, right? And then that's what all these messages audits that, you know, like between an integration admin and a functional user, maybe they'll start looking into it. But this is like showing you kind of under the hood, what were the web services run, the requests, and what was the responses. And I don't think I'll be able to look at this, but let's see. So here's the output. I didn't go ahead and change the name, right, of the file, so that's why it's just output.xml. And if you could open it, unfortunately, because of this remote desktop thing, I can't open it. But this is what it would look like. And if it actually was picking up Logan McNeil, because I had selected several things in terms of the output that I wanted, you get the parameters that are being used, if I selected full file, the time, all of that stuff is going to show up here. It's going to tell you how many workers are specifically in this file. And so all the things that I had selected in terms of first name, last name, gender, birth date, marital status, that'll show up. This is, a screenshot that I took from something else. So if I had selected the status section, if I had selected the position section, so it's going to show me the high level stuff. Then the other thing that I wanted to show you is, and you're probably already aware, is just how you can collapse and expand, certain sections based on, um, like if I only wanted to look at a specific worker once I found it, and I wanted to hide maybe the other workers because I really don't care, or over here, position, I can just go ahead and close that. I don't really need it. Just something to be aware of. What was over here that I wanted to show? Oh, this is just that piece. Okay, now I want to talk about integration maps. So this is a place, just like how I was mentioning earlier, that you can, when you're doing that, selecting a specific field to use, you can only change at that level when you're selecting it. You only get to change the maximum length of the being returned. But let's say I want to go ahead and the downstream system, they don't really care if it's like the full name of male or female. For them, it's M, F, and then other for anything else, right? So the way you go about doing that is on integration maps, and it's under, again, integration system, and then you go to configure integration maps, and this is where you would go and put, so for here, for gender, I get to say, so I could put a default value if for whatever reason, or maybe name type is just legal, right? Like maybe that's every time I want that it just to say legal, irrelevant to what it is actually in Workday. Or over here, if I want it specifically, so this is Workday delivered, right? So they're pulling from the fields and saying, okay, male, and then I could say what I want that external value to be, M, and then the same thing with female. I can say basically what the internal value in Workday is, and then go ahead and say what I'd like it to be for the external once the output file is available.
Can you do conditional formatting?
Not on this. But there is a way you'd be able to do that outside of the mapping. This is just kind of more straightforward, easy way to just map things. I would just be other. So I am going to. Okay, so in terms of what you, I think, wanted to know, right, is if there's a one, let me actually take a step back. If there's a specific field that, Workday hasn't included in those data sections, but I know like there's a calculated field and I really need the information from that calculated field, right? So what I can do is just like how we were doing earlier about over that field override. So where we selected, go ahead and choose the okay, so we'll go back to services. First, I need to add that I want something custom, right? And so over here, all I'm going to do is basically say that I want something custom to this to add on to the output of this file. So I am just going to walk through my screenshots. So over here, I get to say, I want to create a new integration field override service. And I forgot to do that earlier, so that's why I was looking for it. So once you click that, I click create because I'm going to be creating a new one and basically telling it which field I want. So doing that, then I can put a specific name of what I want that field service to be. So let's say I want, I don't know if they still have it in here, the calculated field that I created. And so you could just put any name. I think it was on the worker business object that I had created it. So basically now you get to pull any of the calculated fields that you did, and you're basically just going ahead, giving any specific name, and you could leave the description. So over here, before the next worker starts, I'll have this additional data section show up, additional information, and oh, I put the wrong thing. But what it'll do is it'll go ahead and put hire date, it'll add salary range if those two are available and in the specific format. So just like if we had these calculated fields in a report and whatever information it pulls back, applying whatever calculations are on this calculated field, it'll add this to this additional information section. So that's how you get the flexibility to, one, add any kind of, as long as it's part of one of the business objects, any data that you need from a different field in the format, in the way that you want the downstream system may need it. All right. So the other thing that, when I was working on this, I started thinking about one of the questions that you asked me. And at that time, either I wasn't listening carefully or I didn't fully understand the question because I was more thinking about just EIB specific. But you had asked a question that I wanted to go back to is, how about if you have several different integrations lined up and you need one to run kind of after the other and maybe use the output file from the other one?
Right.
Yes. And I didn't I don't know why I didn't fully understand the question. I think I was thinking about something else, but that's where BPs can kind of get involved and help you in that way where you kind of line up that, okay, integration 1, I need that to run complete, and then integration 2 will only fire if integration 1 is done. And it'll retrieve whatever file, maybe you put it on a server or something like that, on an SFTP, and it'll pull from that specific file and then run the integration. Once that integration is done, then subsequently another integration fires. So the way you can do that is through BPs. And in general, I'll just go through BPs and then I'll show you a screenshot of how you can accomplish just adding it. So right now I was just launching the integration manually, but generally these all have you have to have some sort of business process kind of tied to it. Let me just make sure that it. And one thing I guess I didn't show in the UI, if you just want to see the view, right, you have the integration attributes here, you have integration maps, and then you can have security as well. So this one, you just need access to the template for core. Then let's go ahead and do business process and solve. And automatically it knows, right? It's coming off the integration that it needs to go ahead and fire a service. This type called service fire integration. And what that is going to do, can you give me 1 minute? I need to take care of something. Sorry, just 1 minute. Sorry about that. Okay, so when you create this integration, all it has is um, 2 steps, right? One is initiation that is default for every BP. It always has to have an initiation step. You don't get to remove it. But the second one is basically saying we need to fire this specific integration. And it should have um, the integration name, right, already, since I just did it all, the related actions for the integration. And one other step that I will add is document delivery. We get to integration, because now that I've added the BP, there should be another tab, and I'll just be able to get to it easily like that. Probably yelling at me because to support them. So first thing should be should have given me, I know, edit definition. Um, hmm, let me remove the step and add it back. Mm, mm, and actually integration on this one. There we go. So now when I click OK, it should show me that button where I get to say what integration. So this integration is this BP is tied to the first integration that I built, right? But let's say I have another integration that I want to call after it's delivered the document, then I could just go ahead and say which integration I want. So from here, I'll just pull any name as soon as I put name. So let's see if there's anything working here. I mean, I could choose anything, but whatever makes sense. Let's say this one. And I say OK. So now, and then of course, because there's certain attributes that are associated with it, I have to, with that specific, this new integration, I just go ahead and put those in and just make sure that that's okay, whatever is there. I'll just put Joy Banks. All right, great. And then I click OK. So now this is part of the BP. So let me go back to the BP. Again. You select from this integration process. So making sure that whatever output file is in there, if there's a specific file that we want to take from this integration event, then you go ahead and define the transport explicitly. And delivery attempts is, just in case if the server isn't available, sometimes there's maintenance going on, or the server is down, or there's intermittent issues. You get to say how many attempts do you want to make. I'll select the SFTP, but it's the same ones, email, FTP, all the other ones that we've gone over earlier, and you get to put in what you want, what all the authentication stuff is, and again, if it's restricted to a specific environment. So if you're testing in Sandbox or Impl versus where it should be going in prod, so that way, if you do have a number of integrations that are firing off after and looking for specific output files, they're looking at the right files or the right SFTP folders. And then the other thing you could do is around sequence generators. So if I continually put files in the same folders at some point and all of them have the same names, you're just basically overwriting, right, the information. So you get to use these sequence generators. Go back to the integration. And then see, right now the sequence generator isn't on here, so we need to enable the service. So let's go configure integration service. Sequencing generator. I'll click OK. Once I click OK, then it should be available. Where I get to say, okay, I want the sequence to be 1. Then I can have the date, like you were saying. So it's that same thing. I know you weren't a huge fan of this because uh, but so this is what it would be. And you could use this, and what that'll look like is instead of it being just that output.xml, which is just, their default naming convention, you can go ahead and have it to be worker output and then 120, like however they they set this up. And then the next time it runs, it's just going to automatically go ahead and update that to 2, then it's a third time, 3, and you could always restart it if you need to, that whole sequence. So that's the way. So I think everything around like configuring an integration we've kind of gone over. Now the next piece is really about integration system users. So I know usually your questions are always around security. So this one we need to make sure that this integration is going to probably be running on a schedule. Rarely is it just going to be launched kind of ad hoc. Usually when you're launching this sort of integration, it's really for troubleshooting purposes in another environment, not necessarily prod environment. And what you want to make sure is that when this is being scheduled, that it's not tied to a specific user, right? Like if it's tied to me, if I leave the company, the integration won't run. Even if it's on the schedule, it's gonna like my account is inactive and that's the integration won't run and then you're looking into what it is. So with integrations in general, you need to create an integration system user. This is kind of one of the things, like it's a task, just like create integrations. There's one for create integration system user. And in order to do that, you just have a couple of steps. So you go to the create integration system user task, you create a security group for, and saying basically that this user is specifically for an integration system type. And then you go ahead and you assign security groups. Then you do the same thing that you would for any user, right? Like configure the domain by adding the security group to a specific domain, and there's that specific section, and I'll go through that. Then you have to do the normal thing of anytime you update any sort of security setting, you have to make sure you activate those pending security policy changes. And then after you're done with all of that, then you have to tie this integration system user to the integration itself. So in general, integration system user, you give them a lot of access because nobody's going to really come into the system and do anything. It's really solely just for integrations. And it's up to you. I've seen it done both ways where for every integration, they have a specific integration system user, or some companies, they just need one or two because that's really, there's not much of a difference and they really don't need specific integration system users per integration. So it's really up to you. So it's just tying that integration system user account to the integration. So, so I'm just creating a security group to go ahead and add this integration system user so that way I can go ahead and update security settings. So I know I went through it really quickly, but I just used related actions off the integration and tied this Workday, this integration system user account. Now I need to add this specific integration system user to, I just created a new security group that is specifically where I'll put all my integration system users, right? So that way I don't have to go in every single place and add specific integration system users to the domains when I'm updating it. I'm just using the security groups. So let me go ahead, click done. And then at this point, I need to go in and let's see, contact data. This doesn't let's just take this one. Just any, for example, right? Like, so let me, hmm, and what you'll see is I have these two sections, right? And we went through this earlier, but you have the report and tasks, but then you also have the integration permissions. And if there's for anything person data related, right? Since this is core connector and we're pulling out personal data, we're pulling out compensation data, all that stuff. At a high level, I just need to go in and update the integration permissions and add that security group that I just created that included that integration system user. So that way I could pull data that I need to pull using this integration. And then if I had an inbound integration, I could put data, and that's the only piece that you have to be mindful of. Let's go back and now we'll talk about that change file stuff. So let me go back and the prefix and sys. Let me update the BP so it stops. We can get the signals generated, which is fine. And then let me just remove that service because I don't need it at the moment. So we talked about profile, we talked about configuring the integration. Now it is about talking about that change file stuff. So when I'm launching the integration, let's look at those parameters that show up that we're using. So we talked about the bottom three. Now these top four. So as of entry moment, effective date, last successful as of entry moment, and last successful effective date. So this is really, if you don't select this full file piece, this is what's going to drive what has changed in the tenant for a worker, right? Like seeing if anything has specifically changed, and you have to actually update one more thing I forgot to share. Let me go back over here. So if you're looking for specifically change file sort of thing, or like how you were saying increments of changes in every single file after like you've selected a full file, you have to select this. So worker transaction log service. Basically, this is kind of listening and seeing looking for any transactions that have happened that um, worker data has changed, and specifically the ones that you selected. So I had like date of birth, I had gender, maybe there's hire date or something else, all the fields. It's basically looking anything that's tied to that if there's any changes that need to be reported. So now going back to this, now I want to dig more into what the difference is between the entry moment date and the effective date. So the entry moment date is when the data was actually physically entered into Workday. So, an HR partner is putting, like, you've hired an employee and they're putting the hire information into Workday. That's the entry moment. The effective date is when the transaction is supposed to occur. So, the person was entered into the system at this specific date, like what is it, on Friday, maybe on the 14th, I entered information for this specific new hire, but they're not going to be actually hired. Their hire date isn't maybe until another week, right? And so that's what the effective date is happening. It could be something that's happening today, it could be happening yesterday or tomorrow. But and where you get to kind of see this is over here. I'm sorry, I can make this bigger. Off the worker history tab. So just kind of a refresher of where that is.
So I have a question on this. Right here, with the way you're looking at it, how will you know a person is doing multiple jobs in the same organization?
You go to, you'll get to see that over here.
This is only showing one job, but how will I know that if he's doing multiple? Because it's all the time it happens.
So that usually the summary card isn't showing up here, but you get to see. So the ones that I've normally seen, like when I've been playing around in tenants, is that they have uh, two different positions. There's another card. It's called not job details. It's a worker or person card. That's the one, person card, and it lets you know that all the different roles that they're holding, and then you get to, and each role or each position will have its own. So this one is specifically for um, this chief human resources officer, but let's say she's also, I don't know, I can't think of one. Give me an example. She's something else, an admin for whatever reason in another org, right? That will be another profile of hers. So if there's a lot of
But
people,
since wouldn't
yeah.
it make sense that because now I'm here, I'm looking at this person's profile, right?
Mhm.
So if I'm looking at this person's profile, I should get a snapshot of what this person is.
Yes, but it's all about configuration, right? If I have that enabled, another card here that shows all the different roles that this person has, I'd be able to see that.
So it's configuration based.
Yes, these cards that are showing up are configuration based. So it would just be that another card, if this is important information, and there are a lot of people that have two or three whatever roles, and they should have this person card showing up. I would enable it.
So is the configuration telling you that show only one at a time? Is that what it's telling the configuration?
No, and I wish I had a good example. Let me see.
Because where I'm getting at is,
Mhm.
I would like to see if the person is working. I mean, we call, I'm sure Workday also has it. It's a multiple jobs. So, for
Yes,
example, I can have an employee who might work in this department one day, other department another day, another
uh-huh.
department another day. It can have it. But when I go pull up that person, I can immediately tell all the jobs that the person is working on.
Here.
So that's what I'm trying
Oh,
to get a snapshot of.
yeah. Let's see. Um, no, yeah, it's only 12. Let's see if we can look at someone. Yeah, I think it's that person data. So here, let's see. Yeah, I feel that it's through what I'm saying, that card. You won't get to see, so every position or every role has its own profile, right? So that snapshot that we're seeing is for that specific role. So when I was talking about Joy Banks, if she had two roles, that person card would help you navigate to the two different profiles. But I know what you're saying, that if you have, you know, um, three jobs or whatever, and it's Monday you're working this, Tuesday you're working this, or like have some percentile in one or the other, how that would show. I don't know that at the moment. Is he looking for you? Or she? He does.
No, they open the door and now there are people outside walking in the yard.
Oh,
So he's
oh,
barking at them.
oh,
Sorry.
no, that's fine. And this- Oh, I was doing, let's have it. Yes. Okay. So, oh,
So how much more time do we have? Because I have an appointment I have to leave with.
can you just give me 5 more minutes and then I could
Yeah,
wrap up this
that's
whole
fine.
class? Okay,
Yeah.
that would be great. Um, so let me, and I will wrap it up because basically we're done. So just going more into it, um, when you go off the worker and you go to their worker history, this is where you really get to see the initiated on is this entry moment date when it's been typed in. Effective date is when, even if you've entered it in, but at what point does the compensation change actually go into effect? When does this hire actually hired in the tenant? So this is what can drive the way that the change detection works. So you have to make sure that that transaction log service is enabled. And then once you have that, as long as you have these parameters over here, so you make sure that this transaction log service is enabled and these parameters over here, this last successful as of entry moment and last successful effective date, this is the last time the integration ran. So if you, going back to, I think one of your questions you had earlier, is if you are running it on a daily basis, you have it scheduled every day, you want this to run at midnight, then this is always going to be the date, let's say 2:23 and this was midnight, but this was the last time this ran. And then the next launch, it's going to look for any changes from 2:23 to 2:24 of midnight. So between those dates, were there any changes for any of the fields that you've selected that you want on the output file? And then what it'll do, it'll go ahead and spit out those changes. So let me see if I have an example. I don't have an example, but let's say Joy Banks, for whatever reason, I have phone number that's listed for the output file to make sure that it comes out when the integration runs. If she's updated her contact information and I have that transaction log service enabled, if she made that change and it was effective, um, between, let's say she made that change after 2:23, like at 9 a.m. And the next time the integration is going to run, she falls into that. It says like, hey, there was a change, that she made a change to her contact information. It's going to spit out everything that was part of her file, but you'll get to see that new phone number in there. But it won't spit out the 800 other employees that didn't have any change in information. So that's how you do the change file. And the same thing with scheduling. It's very similar to like what we've been seeing on the for the reports as well. So I'm just going to quickly go through that. So this run frequency was run now, and all I'm going to change is launch schedule instead of run now. You get to say, you know, when you want it. So let's say it's a weekly reoccurrence, everything I wanted to. So we talked about, you know, the integration services enabled that drives what information, what sections are going to be on the XML file. So what the data is going to be related to, personal information, position, compensation, and that additional information if you're adding any calculated fields. These field attributes are, once you selected the specific service, you could go in and say, give me all the fields that are part of this section, or give me specific fields. So over here, I said that I wanted employee ID, name, and that's it for the person stuff, right? And then the last piece is if, and this was the screenshot I guess I was looking for, is if I've added any calculated fields that I still want to pull in to the output file and send additional information, like this I guess is initials, this is the username, I have calculated fields to go ahead and get me the information. I just add it to the integration field overrides and pull those specific calculated fields, and it always shows up at the bottom of all the, just like the sections I had, right? Compensation, it'll show up as additional information. So at the end of giving me all the output for this specific worker, it shows up at the bottom.